We're going to close executive session and reopen the public meeting. This is the June 5th, 2018 meeting of the Port of Bellingham Commissioners meeting. Start with a roll call. Commissioner Briscoe.
Here.
Commissioner Shepard. Here. Commissioner Bell is here. We open these meetings with a public comment period. If you wish to make a comment, I have sign-up sheets that show that people have signed up. If you would like to comment, just let us know at the end of this when we're done with these, and we'll call you to the mic. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. We do have a timer and a bell, so that we can respect the entire time we have, and we allocate about 15 minutes for this, but if it goes a little bit long, we will do so. So I'm going to start with, looks like Robin Pride, is that?
Roger Pride.
Roger Pride, I didn't catch the name. Please come to the mic, and that one's fine. Just tell us what's on your mind.
Okay, thank you.
Good day, sir.
Roger Pride and my wife Fran, we're close to 10-year tenants up at the Blaine Marina. We've donated something close to $60,000 over that period of time. Most of the time, experience has been just fine. But I'm on end dock, out behind the boathouse. But we're now in a position where we have 3, probably 4 liveaboards out of the 14 spaces. And we've just now been confronted with a broker by the name of Dream Boats, who's put a project boat down there who's working to 10 o'clock at night. Maybe you can stomach some of that stuff, but yesterday, 5:30 in the afternoon, the owner and one of his workers were on a barge, which is marked no trespassing, drinking hard liquor. One of your security people had to come down and escort the guy, one of them, off the dock. And my wife was actually, for the first time, afraid or nervous to be on the dock. And why? Well, Gate 1, Gate 2 are supposedly tenants with boats, but what we have is a commercial creep. And the commercial creep is in the form of liveaboards, commercial creep in the form of these brokerage boats. And my main gripe, the plover. I was down here last year. I've written letters on it. And don't get me wrong, I think the plover is a good idea. I have to say it again, okay? It's novel, it's heritage, it's protected, but it's coming by my boat on the weekend 52 times, like a bus route in front of your boat. We're sitting on the end dock out facing the breakwater, beautiful. Got the best spot in the marina as far as I'm concerned. I'm lucky. But the plover has no pollution controls on it, no modern pollution controls. It's blowing smoke in your face. CO2 52 times a day going by. And the tenants that are in there are the ones that are paying the fare. The plover is a volunteer situation, right? And the tenants who are there are contributing something to the city of Blaine, and the tourism aspect of the plover is doing the same thing. And I think that's fine. I presented a solution in a letter which has not been answered. Last year was not answered. And the solution is very simple. It's commercial. It's designated help commercial. We have 2 docks that are pleasure craft, and we have a commercial dock. Why not take the commercial activity, boat brokers and the plover and anybody else, and move them over to the commercial dock? There's a gate there, there's washrooms there, there's parking over there that's not used that much. We have stress on the parking, stress on the washroom facilities, and the pollution, and the people walking up and down the dock who are on there because of the plover. You feel like you're on show. The marina lifestyle experience is being denigrated, and for what? Okay, it's an imposition. You guys in your rules and regulations say you don't want to interrupt the marina lifestyle experience. Great. And then it just says we're only going to see maybe 5% liveaboards. Well, with 4 on our dock, plus a brokerage boat, that's 5. That brings it up to 35% on one dock.
So given the time constraint, have you brought this up to staff?
I came down here and presented. I have brought it to staff. Okay. I have sent letters. To this date, I have had no answer from anybody. I even talked to the guy on the plover and said, hey, you only got 6 bumpers here. Why don't you move them over to the commercial dock? You got a gate, you got washrooms, you got better parking over there. You go down in the busy weekend in the summer, you can't even get a spot. Oh, yeah, and then they put up a fish and chip truck on the Gate 2 parking, takes up 10 spots. Why not put them over where the commercial side is, where there's less pressure? So it's commercial creep. And what it's doing is it's denigrating the marina lifestyle experience that you guys say in your own rules you don't want to interrupt and take something away from a marina experience, okay?
Okay.
It's a very simple thing, and it's like moving them over to the commercial dock
Right.
is a no cost, it doesn't cost you guys anything
So
to do that.
We will address that, and we understand, so
So
make
my
sure.
plea is like, why all the commercialism on Gate 2? We've had other boaters, like Sundance, you don't see them as a problem. Diamond, they're not a problem.
We understand.
This new guy's a problem.
We understand. We allocate
Okay.
3 minutes for this. We will
I'm done.
We will
My
take
time's
your
up.
we will
I didn't
take your
hear the bell.
information. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It went.
I would like to point out to you, though, the fish and chips truck is on the commercial side. That is in the commercial parking lot where they're at. They are located right next to the gate in the commercial parking
I know where they are. We kind of look at that as Gate 2 territory. What's that?
lot. You just stated that they were over on your side taking up parking spaces.
I heard yesterday that one of the commissioners owned that fish and chip boat. Is that right?
Nope.
I'm glad to hear that. So it'd be a conflict, right? Anyway, it's like I said, it's commercial creep.
Right,
It's
we-
taking away from the lifestyle.
We understand. Thank you very
Please,
much for your time.
Please address it, okay?
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Patrick? Long time no see. Are you open?
Yes, and I drop around here once every 3 years, you know. You're my favorite taxing district. And I did like, somebody sent me this online, and I like the fact that there are highlights that you could click to go to documents. I thought that was really good. The gal that inspired me to come here was upset because you rent out Savantage Park for private activities and people can't get to the bathrooms. Now, that was the inspiration. I did use your bathroom there and I flushed. Now listen, seriously, you guys have a whole lot of property all over the county. A lot of it is sitting there waiting to be developed. A lot of it actually has bus routes that go right by it. I know that your job, in your mind, is to stimulate the economy. As you stimulate the economy, you wind up, just because the economy is working, a greater spread of wealth in people. I'm thinking, hey, we're paying property tax into you guys. You have property that you're not necessarily using. Maybe you need to be open if an agency should come to you and say, hey, you got a spot out in Sumas. It's near the bus route. I have an organization. We'd like to rent that for 3 years. We're going to do an homeless camp there. We're just going to let people live in tents. We're going to haul off their manure in a chuck wagon or something. All I'm doing is presenting an idea. I'm not going to do any more with this. Good luck with everything you're doing. Hang in there. I'll go sail my boat sometime.
Thank you for your comment.
So is it too much to ask that next time you come, you bring some macaroons with you? Because those are to die for. If you haven't been there, the Sea Shop is amazing out in Birch Bay. Thank you, Patrick. All right, Jeff? Yep, say your name, where you're from.
My name is Jeff Middaugh, live in Bellingham. As you all may remember, a group of us have been working for the last 12 years to have safety improvements added to Bellingham Railroad crossings to make them safer and eventually quieter. With the port's strong leadership, we're as close as we've ever been to have safer and quieter crossings. We again wish to thank the port commissioners and your staff for this outstanding support to all these efforts. Thank you, Mr. Fix, and your staff, both past and future. We are getting closer, and we do not want to lose the momentum for a Southside quiet zone, safety zone. Please continue to make progress on the Alaska Ferry crossings, and I urge the city of Bellingham, you to urge the city of Bellingham to complete the Bay Street crossing. Once Bay Street is complete, both the port and the city will have all the pieces in place to jointly implement an FRA-compliant quiet zone for the south side of Bellingham. Please continue with your efforts and your support for our safety efforts and complete the task of having an FRA-compliant quiet zone for the 5 Southside crossings. By the port and the City of Bellingham working together, this can be completed by the end of 2018. This issue takes political leadership, commitment, and perseverance. The port has provided this to this effort, and we really do appreciate it. Let's finish the job for the south half of Bellingham and then go on to the next steps for the waterfront and other crossings. Thank you for making us all safer.
Thank you, Mr. Midwall, for your comment and for taking the time to come out. Anyone else have any other comments for the port? Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda.
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through I.
Any of the commissioners want to say anything?
I have no questions on it.
I have no questions on
I-
it. Obviously, we're in the minority.
I just had a question on B. I think it doesn't appear to be this boat, but I got a report that there was a boat that was washed up on the shore at Squalicum Beach over the weekend. We've got a approval for a sale of a vessel. It doesn't appear to be the same boat, but somebody did report to me that there was a boat that washed up, and it had a note on it saying that port staff knew about it and we were going to be addressing it. Do you just have a quick update for me?
Yeah, Commissioner Alan Birdsall, manager of marinas. This is not the same boat. This boat is one that's moored in Squalicum Harbor. We are aware of the one that has floated up over Squalicum Beach. There's a process, a legal process, in which we can acquire that boat and then have it disposed of, and with partial funding under the Department of Natural Resources derelict vessel program. And we're currently moving through that process so that we can acquire the boat and remove it. It could be 30 to 60 days, though.
Great. And my only other comment was on F, and I just wanted to thank everybody who applied to serve on the BIAC committee and recognize that the BIAC voted unanimously to recommend Mr. Viz. So thank you to all those applicants.
And I was going to let this go, but I've got a couple of comments that, just on that process. I did have one of those applicants reach out to me, and I don't know if you guys did too. I was kind of curious to see if any of them reached out to you no, he would not call me.
I did have one person just give me a heads up that they were applying.
But they were applying, yeah. And we, at this point, we have to trust that they have vetted those candidates. I think at some point I'd like to do a little bit deeper dive, since we are the ones voting on them. It would be nice to have something more than just a paper in front of me. I think probably would behoove us to go to those meetings and.
As long as it's been brought up, I have a question. Do we have anybody from the Blaine area that's representing that district up there on the?
Blaine is covered under the North County area. Sunil Harman, Director of Aviation. Blaine is covered under North County, so this was a position for North County. That's basically everything north of the airport,
Okay.
all the way east to west. So Blaine all the way to Linden and Sumas.
I guess maybe further into that question, do we have anybody out of the Blaine area? Or are most of the people from Linden?
Most of the people are actually south. The ones that are in the airport influence area, the ones that are actually impacted by airport operations.
All right, thank you.
That being said, any other issues? I'm going to say that this is an amazing consent agenda that accomplishes a tremendous amount of cleanup. It keeps a great restaurant. It's going to mean an amazing transformation of Bellingham Cold Storage as it moves forward. So with that, I would like to call for the vote.
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through I.
Commissioner Briscoe?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd? Aye. Mr. Bell is also an aye. Thank you all for coming, those of you represented by that, and congratulations to all of you. Okay, presentations, Waterfront District and the ASB aeration pond update. Going to ask our Environmental Director, Brian.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Brian Gowron, Director of Environmental Programs. I have a brief update today on the Whatcom Waterway Phase 2 environmental cleanup project with a focus and an emphasis on the land use discussion and decisions around the ASB, or Aerated Stabilization Basin. So what I'm planning on talking about here today is give a little bit of background and context on the Whatcom Waterway. And Commissioner Briscoe, I apologize, some of this will be repetitive for you from previous presentations, but just since there's a lot of work that's been done to date, I do have a few upfront slides that give some history and context of what we've done on Whatcom Waterway so that the Commission's all on the same page as we move forward into some of the next steps discussions. We have a little brief discussion on the recent staff work, what we've been undertaking based on some Commission direction from last year. Talk a little bit on the different variety of cleanup approaches that we might take in the ASB specifically, and some of the land use options that we're exploring as staff kind of walks through this process. And then really discuss what we think the process is for moving forward to determine next steps, get feedback from the Commission with a goal of some kind of recommendation to the Commission and a time frame for that, as well as then open it up for a Commission discussion. I know this was a topic that was on the slate for a previous work study session, and so want to make sure that the Commission has an opportunity to have a discussion on the ASB, and as well as while staff's here. So that's what I'm planning on going through, and feel free to jump in with any questions as I move along.
Thank you, Brian, for what you said, but as many gray hairs keep appearing, I could probably use a refresher course here.
Okay, good. So on this figure here, just wanted to highlight a few things. One, I know the font size on some of those labels are very small. They're really not pertinent to what the image shows. What I wanted to do was to have you look at that, the light blue lines, that outer boundary on the left-hand side of the figure up here, that shows the extent of the site, the Whatcom Waterway cleanup site. And under the Model Toxics Control Act, or MODCA, Department of Ecology calls a cleanup site where contamination has come to be present. So it doesn't follow property boundaries, fence lines, that sort of thing. It's where when we go out and do an investigation and look at different cleanup alternatives, where contamination is present, that's where the site boundary has been determined to be. So all told, the Whatcom Waterway site is one of the larger sediment cleanup sites in Washington State. It's over 700 acres all told. You can see it takes up a good portion of the inner Bellingham Bay. And the contaminants associated with Whatcom Waterway are primarily mercury in the sediments and phenolic compounds, which are usually associated with wood products, generally all associated with the former practices at the Georgia-Pacific Mill. But the other thing I want to highlight here is the majority of the contamination out in the outer bay has already been capped with clean sediments that are naturally occurring that come out of the Nooksack. There's a deposition rate that's been established, and we know that contamination is getting slowly buried by natural processes. So the contamination that is present out there is really buried deeper in the sediments than it is in the upper and shoreline areas. So what I want to highlight then is this is a similar figure, but the areas that we're going to be talking about mostly today are highlighted in the light blue. So what you traditionally think of as the Whatcom Waterway is the inner waterway in front of the Georgia-Pacific Mill property, as well as the outer waterway out in front of the shipping terminal, and the ASB, or Aerated Stabilization Basin. So those are the main elements that we actively have to do cleanup on, whereas the majority of the remaining area in light gray is natural recovery areas. So a little bit in background, we've done a lot of work to date. It's been going on for a long period of time. Bellingham Bay was identified in the mid-90s by the Department of Ecology as a pilot project for a bay-wide approach of looking at cleanup projects, not only through individual projects, but more holistically, identifying a number of cleanup sites, looking at habitat cleanup and redevelopment, or habitat cleanup and redevelopment all at the same time, and looking at a comprehensive approach to addressing those through those three different types of projects. And so we've been working on the Whatcom Waterway for a number of years. Georgia-Pacific actually took the first crack at RIFS, or Remedial Investigation and Feasibility Study, in 2002. They identified a preferred cleanup approach there where they would be dredging the waterway and putting that contaminated sediment into the ASB. We then started the process of acquiring the Georgia-Pacific properties, including the ASB, in 2005. The Port City and DNR took over that process, and we achieved a final RIFS in 2006. We have a cleanup action plan and a consent decree, which is the legal agreement that we have with the state. It's essentially a court order telling us how we're going to do the cleanup in 2007. Then the investigation, the pre-design investigation, we went through some initial design. And that's where, in 2011, some of the regulations changed, and that's when we really started to break this project up into two different, or multiple phases. And we had a consent decree amendment where we broke up the project into phase 1 and phase 2. And we started right away working on the detailed engineering and design of the phase 1 work, and I'll highlight some of this on a map on where we're talking about. And we initiated the permitting process, and that was a long, drawn-out piece of work, because it's a large process with complex work in the water with Army Corps of Engineers and other interested parties that had a lot to say about how we approached this, but ultimately got our nationwide 38 permit, which allowed us to do that project, and completed Whatcom Waterway Phase 1 construction in 2015 and 16. So part of the purpose of this slide is to not only just highlight the work that we've done, but how long it takes sometimes. And we've got to keep in mind that this was just to do the first phase of work, and we're now going to be stepping into the second phase of work, which I'll talk about in a little more detail here. Any questions so far on how we've gotten to where we are?
Yeah, I just have a real quick one. Given the fact that it's been 10 years since you went through the RIFS process, how do you tweak this along the way to account for new technologies or new procedures? Does that just sort of happen during the permitting process?
It does a couple ways. So that's a great question. So the RFS is fairly high level. You know, you do identify technologies and methods that you could use. Then when you go into the engineering and design phase of work, you really do the engineers start really kind of cranking on the reality, taking that concept and putting it into more reality. And then there are, industry standards that have been updated. And you look at those. When we split this up into multiple phases, we also then had the opportunity to look at, are we approaching these phases in the right way? And actually, that's a perfect segue to what we're going to be talking about here in a minute, is we've already agreed to an approach for phase 2, but prior to implementation, based for commission direction, community input, other things like that, do we want to reassess how we approach that? There's multiple times you can do that. But the engineering phase for sure looks at, okay, are we using the best available technologies to accomplish that? So just to highlight a few things here, just a success from Whatcom Waterway Phase 1. It was one of the largest capital projects we took on. It was a $35 million plus construction project. We dredged the inner waterway. We dredged portions of the outer waterway in front of the Bellingham shipping terminal. Ultimately dredged over 100,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediment out of Bellingham Bay. That's, if there's 10 yards in a dump truck, so that's over 10,000 dump trucks worth of contaminated sediment that came out of the inner waterway. We also then installed a sheet pile wall along the marine trades side of things on the north side of the Whatcom Waterway. That's a watertight sheet pile wall to prevent contaminated groundwater from the uplands recontaminating the sediment in the inner waterway. We removed just a ton of just junk and buried metal and creosote-treated timbers. I think over 5,000 tons of creosote-treated timber came out of the inner waterway. So, in restoring that shoreline in multiple ways, some ways with this bulkhead to support marine trades, and then on the south side of the waterway, we've pulled back portions of the shoreline and in the log pond. And in the middle photo right here, you can see on the inside of the log pond, we have a softer shoreline that will allow for that area to be designated more as a habitat area. So a lot of stuff was accomplished in that Whatcom Waterway Phase 1, and now we get to look at what comes next. So with that in mind, so we are under a consent decree, as I mentioned earlier. We're under basically a court order that was filed with Whatcom County. It has a number of elements that come along with that. We're required to record some restrictive covenants that document what was done on the property. If there was a cap placed in the waterway in an area that we own, we are obligated to maintain that cap. We submitted a Phase 1 as-built report, which took all of the work that we've done and packaged that into an engineering report that documents that, and we are in the final phases of getting that approved by the Department of Ecology. We expect that to be finalized with a Phase 1 completion letter within the next month or two at the latest. And with that box checked, with that completion letter, that actually pushes us to start our next phase of work, to start working on the next deliverable under the consent decree, which is to submit to Ecology an engineering and design report, which is a lot of work to actually get that completed, 270 days from the approval of the as-built report. So that doesn't give us a whole lot of time to actually go out and start engineering the Phase 2 work. So what I wanted to do here is just highlight what have we currently agreed to do under the Phase 2. And this, I'll kind of highlight this by colors because there's a lot built into this. And this is what we've currently agreed to under the consent decree, that it was amended and broke the project up into 2 phases. This is the Whatcom Waterway Phase 2, and it includes the ASB, and that's why I want to highlight what we're talking about here today. The area in purple is the ASB, and that would be, there's industrial sludges from the wastewater treatment that was used for by GP, as well as our ongoing use of that as a stormwater management pond. So we would remove those sludges and dry them out and dispose of them at an upland landfill. There's over 300,000 cubic yards, so that's 3 times what we did in Whatcom Waterway Phase 1 of sludges in the ASB. And then we would actually over-dredge that deeper and remove the clean sands that are below that to create even a deeper basin in the footprint of the ASB. Then in the areas in orange, which are the remaining area, a little sliver of area that's out in front of the Bellingham shipping terminal, as well as the remaining federal channel that's out in the federal channel in front of the Bellingham shipping terminal and further out into the bay. We would dredge the contaminated sediments to the authorized depth for the federal channel in that area and actually place those contaminated sediments into that deeper basin that we dug out in the ASB. We would then, in the light blue here, we would do another, like some very focused dredging and capping of the inner waterway, just like we did with the inner waterway as part of Phase 1. Then we would actually cap that contaminated sediment that we placed in the bottom of the ASB, bring it up to a marina depth, and then breach the breakwater of the ASB to open that up to what would be then planned for a land use plan to be the future marina in that basin. So that's the cleanup approach that we have agreed to start engineering in about 270 days. So there's a lot of work to go into that. But based on this approach and what we've heard from the commission, we're now going to start working on, is that the right project to undertake? Any questions on this so far?
I have none.
The known contamination in the ASB has that been explored?
Oh, yeah.
Have you put the?
Yeah, we've sampled, prior to splitting this project into 2 phases, we thought we were going to do all this in one project. And we did a significant amount of investigation to delineate and define the extent of contamination, because the RIFS does it at one level, and then the engineering kind of ratchets that down. And in the ASB, we actually got drill rigs out on floats out in the ASB to go sample the sludges. We know the depth of them, we know the thickness, we know the physical makeup of that, the chemical makeup. So we might have to do a little bit more just to reconfirm it, but that we have a lot of information on it.
And what is the makeup of those contaminants? Is it consistent with the other contaminants we're seeing, or, and is there mercury in that site? Because I know it was kind of, the lighter materials were supposed to typically go over there.
Right, so there is mercury contamination in there. It's not at the same level as we're seeing in the upland areas where we handled, where GP handled elemental mercury, but there are dissolved and concentrations of mercury in those sediments because it was all part of their process. They incrementally over the years, GP put more and more controls on their wastewater, but this was, even from the start, had very few technologies that remove that mercury, but by the end of their operations, they actually had a mercury recovery system that really took a lot of that out. So there is mercury in that sediment. There's dioxins and phenolic compounds and a few other metals and that sort of thing.
Did you do a perimeter test on that to see if we've got any runners?
We've tested all around the ASB, inside and out, and yeah.
But sure that it's contained within the walls
Yep.
of the ASB? Great.
It is, yeah.
An escapee.
We were looking at, the commission has given us informal direction previously to start looking at, is this the approach we wanted to take? And back in November of 2017, we did a similar briefing to the previous commission as we are today. And what the direction we got from that commission was to start looking at the ASB land use. So start evaluating what we really want to do with the ASB. Is it a marina? Is it something else? We do need to consider the cleanup requirements, so, as big as ideas we can get is great, but we are working within a cleanup project. Continue looking for potential users in that area, not just, be open-minded to different ideas. Looks for customers, for lack of a better term. Evaluate what the port needs operationally, not just in the ASB, but out in front of the Bellingham Shipping Terminal. We want to make sure that when we do pull the trigger on this cleanup project, that we're meeting all the operational needs and we're not creating a problem that was unforeseen because we were focused only on one element. We want to look at the port operational needs, consider the community interests, of course, and then cost and funding considerations are a big element of this. The MODCA funding, grant funding has been up and down over the years. We want to make sure we know where that's at. And then we also have an AIG insurance coverage considerations as we look at these projects and how they work. So that was the direction from the commission in 2017. November at the end of the year. And so what we've been doing since then, we had been working on this, but we really have ramped that up. We have a port staff work group that we've put together. We meet bi-weekly, really talk through a variety of different elements. There's new staff. We really have a lot of getting up to speed to do with some new staff. There's a lot of history and background to this. But one of the things I wanted to highlight, it is a multi-divisional effort. Although this is a cleanup project, it really takes almost every division except for aviation to look at this. I mean, unless we wanted to put an airport down there, that could be an idea, but I don't think that's in the cards. So it includes environmental, marinas, marine terminals, real estate, economic development, facilities and planning. And so we really are approaching this from a multi-divisional look and looking at our land use goals as well as our operational needs. So right now, that's what we've been focusing on, primarily on our operational needs, because I want to make sure that as we start to engineer things or before we start engineering things, that our operations divisions are really dialed in and bought in to what we're proposing to do here. And then we'll be coming forward to the commission, of course, on those recommendations. So what we have, a few things I want to highlight on the ASB is we have our current plan, which I just described, which would be dredging out the ASB and building a marina. And so that's the cleanup approach. We could go start engineering that right now. We have that under a consent decree, and we could just go do it. Funding and all those other considerations, of course, get taken in mind. The other things, and these are very crude, very just preliminary, we haven't had engineers working on this, but another approach we could look at that could change how the lens that we look through land use is we could fill part of the ASB. We could consolidate the sludges that are in the ASB over onto one side, build a sheet pile wall or some kind of berm that would contain that material over on one side, and then dredge the waterway just like the rest of the plan was out in front of the Bellingham Shipping Terminal out in the federal channel, and place that material into that green square. It could be configured in a variety of different ways. This was just an easy way to break it up, and put that into the ASB and create kind of a higher upland with a smaller open water area. We could still breach the ASB and create some kind of smaller marina, some other use, some kind of marine trades area, something else that could use that smaller basin for, that would be open water. And then the other scenario would be that we could completely fill the ASB, rather than consolidating the sludges, just leave them where they are, dredge the material, and then fill in the ASB. The one thing to note there is that the volume and capacity of that, we would need more material. We'd have to bring in more material, whether it's imported clean material or bringing in other projects, other cleanup projects, other dredging projects throughout the region, and fill that material up to actually create a grade that you could use. Then you could have, more usable land. So the overall acreage of this area is about 27, 28 acres. So if we did the partial fill, that would create about 14 acres of upland and about, give or take, the same acreage in water. And then up here you have about 27, 28 acres of upland. One thing I want to note on here is the Department of Ecology has been clear and repeats this over and over, is that the land use decisions that the entities that own the property make informs how we're going to do the cleanup. Although we've agreed to do the basin with the marina decision is kind of what helped derive that, not drive, but helped inform Ecology's decision to do that type of cleanup. If we make a different land use decision, the Port Commission wants to go a different direction, the cleanup can change, and we could amend that consent decree, and we can work with ecology on that as long as the cleanup is compatible with the land use decisions. So with that in mind, what some of our staff has been doing, and this, I don't expect you to read all this, I'll walk through this a little bit, is we took a shot at just saying, okay, what's the infinite, not infinite, but what's a wide range of opportunities and things that we could do for land use out there? If we're really gonna just a list of things on the whiteboard, what do those include? And what are alternative land use options that we have in front of us? And there's a wide range of possibilities, obviously. And then what we did is we did the checkbox on the right there that says, okay, would those uses be compatible with any one of those three options that I just walked through of the leaving the basin as it's currently designed, filling part of the upland, or filling all of the upland, or filling all of the ASB. And so you can see here, without going through this matrix, and I think we will ultimately when we get to a commission decision, but I want to show you kind of our thought process a little bit. We got everything from the Clean Ocean Marina, which was the current plan, continued stormwater treatment, park and open space, a marine terminal, barge terminal, shipyard, dry stack storage, everything down to cold storage, fish processing, distant water fleet, casino boats, you name it. We threw it on the list and just said, okay, what could you do in this area? And then we checked the boxes to say, okay, could you do this use in this current plan? Could you do it in the partial fill? And could you do it in the full fill? And I think what we walked away from this with was, since there is no current customer that we have that's driving our land use decision, we wanted to try to look at, if we have to make a call, do we try to maximize flexibility? And do we make a cleanup decision that provides us the maximum flexibility in the future moving forward? And that's just kind of what this highlights, is that it looks to us like the partial fill does that. But this has not been vetted. This is our first step. This is going to be a number of discussions that go along with this. We might have a customer that comes and defines this better. We might have a cleanup decision that we want to accommodate, or we might want to maximize the flexibility. And then, of course, prior to making any decision, we'll be looking at the economics, the environmental, and the community kind of thoughts and considerations on this. And some of those considerations include, land use regulations, like what can we really do, what can we not do? I mean, we can't. That was a great whiteboard exercise, but who knows if any of it was even allowable? That was not the lens we were looking through. So we'll have to look through what can we do. The sub area plan already defines that as marine trades area. Should it just be marine trades period? And anyway, so there's a lot of things we're going to be taking into account. The costs, the cleanup, the development capital cost, opportunity cost. Are we going to do anything that precludes a future opportunity? Maintaining flexibility, job creation, land values, timeframes. Do we have a timeframe driver that we really need to meet? Public perception and other considerations, and then our long range planning uses, as well as opportunities to use maybe public-private partnerships or that kind of sort of thing. So this is some of the things we'll be talking to the commission about, but we just want you to know that staff's starting to put those things together. And so where we're at in the process of what we see happening here is, we got the initial direction back in November. We had a state of the boating industry update the commission had in March of this year. Paul Sorensen from BST Consultants came in and talked about kind of the viability of marinas. We wanted that to be in the background of our thought process as we move forward. Briefed the commission today just on process, just to say, okay, are we moving in the right direction? The things that we staff should be taking into consideration. We ultimately have a goal of having some sort of recommendation to the commission by the end of this year on, taking all of these things into consideration and saying, okay, here's what we're recommending on a real path forward. This is more the process path forward. And then the goal would be to initiate some design in 2019 with coordination with the Department of Ecology. And if things progressed along, I think we could be under construction in the next 3 to 5 years. So that's really where we're at, and like I said, happy to open it up to the commission for just discussion amongst yourselves, or if you have any questions for me, however you'd like to approach this one.
Going back to the uses, there was an asterisk by some of those X's.
Oh, yeah.
What was that?
So that's great question. So what we said was in the...
That's 2 today, I just want to...
Great question.
I get a point.
3 or what?
I take whatever I can get.
So what we looked at was in the full fill, at first when we started looking at that, we said, you know, you couldn't do some of these things if you fill it all in because you've gotten rid of all the water. But the asterisk actually says, well, if you built it on the waterway side of it, like where Commissioner Briscoe, you've brought up extending those dolphins along the south face of the ASB in the Whatcom Waterway, could you do things that are adjacent to, in the inner channel, that are adjacent to the ASB upland? So you'd have to create a shoreline that was compatible for those, but we didn't want to say, well, no, you can't do it because you could still fill in all that ASB, and then you'd have to figure out how to have some of these uses in the waterway. So you could have a marine terminal, or what are some of the things we have the asterisks by? Like fish processing and offload. You could have berthing right up against the ASB if you created that into more of a vertical wall, and then have the upland next to it, but you're in the waterway rather than the inside of the breakwater. So that's what we're talking about.
What's our expectations of the seismic capacity for the break wall that exists now? I know when we're doing, you know, if we're building a building, we have to evaluate it for its seismic strength and how it's going to handle a seismic event. What about that break wall, especially if we're guaranteeing, you know, we're relying on it to hold contaminants in,
Yeah.
and potentially even more if we went with a storage option as a regional facility.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is that depending on the use, I mean, I think the seismic considerations for the most part will be looked at when you have it, if you filled in a portion of it. So where the filled in land abuts the breakwater, whereas if you left, you know, the outer breakwater, you know, that could be repaired fairly easily, but there's no load on it on either way. But any filling scenario, the engineering work would take all the seismic considerations into account. So if we put it down the middle of we filled in, did the partial fill, that all the faces that had land abutting it would have to make sure that they could withstand a seismic event. So there might be some upgrades to the bulkhead or to the breakwater. You have to build a wall or a bulkhead that could withstand that. I mean, that's the inner waterway work that we did in the Whatcom Waterway Phase 1. That took seismic considerations into account for the design of that bulkhead wall, as well as all the shorelines that they could either survive or be easily repaired after a seismic event. So that would be the geotechnical concerns about filling that in with dredged material is a significant issue, though. Depending on what you were to build on top of it, there'd have to be ground improvements. Any development or buildings on top of that newly created fill would have to go through some serious geotechnical design and probably ground improvements like stone columns and other things that we're doing like we do around here.
Isn't the bottom line, if we have a major seismic event, everything's gonna kind of disappear from that bluff this way anyway?
There'll be some compromised buildings for sure, yeah.
Were you through, Commissioner Shepard? Yeah. So clarification for me, are we looking for a little bit more, maybe narrowing your direction of what to be looking for to put in there at this time, or you just?
Really, for staff, we're going to keep working on that and continuing to refine it. But if there's specific issues you'd like us to take into account or things that you'd like us to work on, we're happy to do that. Or if the commission just wanted to have a discussion on that, that's kind of how we were framing it, just in the sense that the previous intent was, or hope was, to have this as part of one of the work studies. So this kind of can facilitate that. If you'd like to try to narrow that down, that's fine. But I think we could add in more updates and do more check-ins with the commission as we progress. We've got a fair amount of work to do, but I think we're really ramping that up right now.
Can you back up to the graph you had there? So you got a lot of things there to narrow down. I mean, I think the commission may need to come to a consensus on whether we're going to commercialize this area, or we're going to put parks and these other things in there. And if we're going to leave it in marine trades, would that not help you make the decision, or would that make your choices easier?
I think one thing that I noticed that highlighted this was that would, yes, so it would. The thing that kept rising to the top for me, though, was this: do we just try to maximize the flexibility of that? Like, any decision that we make, what does it preclude us from doing in the future? If we don't have a customer for any one of those things, or a use that's defined yet if we did one alternative, is there anything that we could start working on that wouldn't preclude, any of these future uses. And that might be what we want to explore a little bit more, to say, okay, if we did go down the direction of a partial fill and we want to start like exploring the one that gives us the maximum flexibility, then we can really start to dive into weeding out the things that are kind of just ideas that were on the whiteboard, and start getting more realistic and seeing what each one of the ones that the commission is interested in exploring, what are the specific needs of those. So that might be the next check-in, is to say, we've weeded out certain things that are clearly just an idea.
Well, something that comes to mind, I mean, I think I've spoken to this before, is when GP packed their bags, so to speak, and moved out of here, we lost a lot of jobs. And I would certainly like to use this area to try and get a large number of jobs back to Whatcom County. I think at this point in time, with what's going on to the south, being Everett, Seattle, Tacoma, and what's going on to the north of Vancouver, and the growing pains they're having, people are leaving fairly steadily, and they're looking for new places to go. I've always been a proponent, since we started having discussions over a year ago on this, of partially filling and opening up to draw a customer, and we had a potential customer that wanted to come here if that was the case, but that kind of maybe went beside the way. I would urge my commissioners to think seriously about the partial fill, and on this is in our marine trades area now, and we've worked hard to build up that marine trades area. I would like to try and keep it a marine trades area and bring a large marine trade company in, and I think we can do that. I've had some talks with some folks, and there's good interest, but it's kind of a situation where you have to build it and they will come. You can sit around and talk to folks all day long, and when you tell them it's 3 to 5 years out or 10 years out to get it done, they go somewhere else if they can get it done quicker. So I think we're in a position where we're going to have to make some decisions to move forward and take some risk. But I think partially filling, in my mind, is the best option. We need a little more ground around there. That's very obvious. We also have growing pains with dockage to put larger vessels. So I believe that in my mind, opening it up the ASB and partial filling is a direction we should probably go. And I'd like to be able to give our staff a little narrower beam to work on than what we're working with here, because it takes a great amount of their time to try and figure things out. And I think the commission's role here, part of it is to give them that direction, to help them narrow it down. So that's kind of what I would like to do, if we can come to some kind of consensus on the direction.
Would you be amenable to saying, put a time frame on this? Because I think if this is still on our plate 2 to 3 years from now,
I want to do it
I will
last
be
year.
I'll consider myself a failure. So what I would like to do is I would like to put this on the agenda for the September meeting, perhaps, and see if we can't discuss and maybe come to at least maybe the top 1 or 2 at that point, narrow it down to those options by September, and put it on the agenda for the September meeting, if that's okay with you. If that's not a too aggressive a time frame, but I honestly believe that's the best time frame for this
First or second meeting?
first meeting. Let's get it done.
I'll be here. You have to listen to me on the phone.
Oh, actually, I'd like, well, he's not going to be here, so the first meeting's ideal. We can hit the mute button.
I will be here, but I'll sound like the cloud.
Okay, the second meeting in September, if that's okay, we'll put our heads together. And if we need to have a public discussion sometime before then, I think that's probably an appropriate thing to do. But I do believe that we need to have this off our plate by the September timeframe, if you guys are agreeable.
So, Commissioners, that works generally with the schedule that I was thinking, is that we were hoping to have some kind of recommendation by the end of the year. I think what we might want to do is staff will continue to be working on this, and we have like I said, we have meetings on this every other week. So this was just really designed to say, like, the first meeting, we put all these ideas on the board just to say, okay, we're looking at the world of possibilities. We're narrowing those in operationally right now anyway, so we will also maybe be working with the commission on that well before, just to keep you informed on what staff is developing as we get closer to that September commission meeting.
And I think maybe you could help us out a bit by just eliminating some of the things that are just non-starters.
Yeah.
And that'll cull the herd.
Sure.
immediately, and then we can work from there.
Or we could
Casino
eliminate
boats.
those non-starters for them by coming to what I asked about. Are we going to,
Yeah.
is our perception as a commission, are we going to fill it partially and open it to the water? That would narrow down, I mean, if that's,
For me, I'm more adverse to a full fill. You know, it's a unique structure that we could never get permitted to build today. And so I think we would lose a significant amount of capacity if we went for a full fill option. And so the other thing I like about the, you know, either the partial or the partial fill or the current plan is that it does necessitate a higher level of cleanup than a full fill was. And I do like achieving as stringent of a cleanup as we can within the resources that we have.
Yeah, and I'd like to explore, because I admit ignorance on a lot of this, what's involved with all of them, but the one that gives us the most flexibility is where I would like to go. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about each one of those options and where we might go with the most flexibility. So I'm not willing to give you that answer today, but I think I will be shortly, and maybe that's what we do during a work session, is possibly sit down and discuss what does give us the best flexibility for a move forward. And we can probably schedule that for a time before September.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Briscoe, out of the three of you, has the most knowledge and history on this. So to have a work study, if you're on the phone, should probably be okay. I mean, I'm speaking for you, but yeah, I think.
We can, great.
unless we're talking.
Great,
during-
that sounds
Yeah.
great.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Great job, Brian. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, now we've got this presentation on the Blaine Harper Web Locker. John, oh, haven't seen you in a while.
You made him nervous when you said that.
He ran.
All right, good afternoon, Commissioners. Adam Fulton, Director of Facilities. This afternoon, we'd just like to give you a brief update on this project. It's, $2.5 to $3 million of significant spending for the port. And along the way of this update, there are no actions for the Commission to take today. However, we are sort of looking for 3 nods of the head that we're heading in the right direction with a few of our design components. Those 3 areas that we'll be asking about is, first of all, our treatment of the region, i.e. this portion of the harbor. The second is the actual building, and then third is the accommodation of that building to potentially host solar panels. So just a brief overview, and then I'll turn it over to the project team. First of all is, along with, like any site at the port, the site holds some opportunities and some challenges. And if I may just very briefly on the challenges, you can see Blaine Harbor as in an overview. This wants to be a mud flat, like it has been geologic time. And of course, Blaine Harbor is created by dredging that, by installing a rubber-mounted breakwater, then dredging out the interior, and then storing those sediments back here. So as we go to put this building here, which you'll see later in the presentation, we're on very soft soils. And that has ramifications to the building and to the cost of the project, frankly. It's not insurmountable, it's just a challenge. It's not like building out on a riverbed somewhere in the middle of the county. It's different. The opportunities that the project gives us, amongst a few other things, but one is the regional treatment of this area, which again, I'll let John Gibson address. But in short, because it's a large development, the city of Blaine is going to require that we upgrade Milholland Drive. We don't think that's necessarily the best expenditure. And so what we're trying to work with the city of Blaine on are basically 2 considerations. First of all, that we be allowed to extend a trail. We have the Promenade Trail going along here. We'd like to extend that trail along this fill and on out to the boat launch restrooms. Be a nice amenity for the area, nice for walkers, this sort of thing. And the second is we have lacking stormwater treatment facilities, and to date we've been sort of dancing around the requirement, and really in my mind, kind of gaming the governmental system, and it's almost government gaming government at that point. And it doesn't feel right to me. I don't think it's what we want to do as a sister agency or partner with City of Blaine in any way. So along with this trail, there's the potential to add stormwater treatment in the form of a long bioswale that parallels the trail. Really nice amenity. It fits in there very well. And again, I'll let John describe that in a little more detail. But we are gonna ask, do you agree, in kind of a nod of the head sort of a way in just a moment. Another opportunity the project avails itself to is the possible introduction of power generation. Adrian Hedges on Brian Gowan's staff did a nice high-level exploration of power generation possibilities for the port. The statement being, we have a lot of roofs. And I'm kind of Debbie Downer to that party because I say, well, we do have a lot of roofs, but not every roof is capable of supporting the additional load of photovoltaic panels or solar panels. So what we would like to do then, again, this is one of the nods of the head we're hoping for today, is as we build new structures, such as WebLocker 1, we'd like to do investigation with our consultants on making those structures capable of potentially hosting solar panels in the future, as well as any electrical infrastructure that might be required or beneficial to do earlier than later. So that's a question to the commission. It doesn't cost very much now, but it does create for us a potential in the future for these newer structures that we build from now in the next 5-10 years to accommodate and host solar power generation. That's a question. Does the commission more or less agree with that or have objection to that?
Do you mind if we deal with these as you bring them up? So that would be something we can probably dispose of fairly quickly.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm of the opinion that all of our buildings, every new building should accommodate solar. It just makes sense, and if we can do it, we're able to buy a product that we manufacture here in Bellingham, in Whatcom County, and it allows us to have a positive economic revenue stream from otherwise something that holds a lot of birds sitting on it. We may need a squeegee up there for some seagull poop.
Yeah.
That's going to get in the way of our of our amazing power generation. But this is ways that we're able to really take an issue of sustainability and economic development and put them together. My opinion.
Commissioner Briscoe?
Well, being a Blaine resident, having spent a lot of time in Blaine, the first question, and don't get me wrong, I'm not against solar panels at all. But what I would have to ask you is, how are these things going to take the clamshells drop from 60, 70 feet up that are, I don't know, they maybe weigh a pound, half a pound, whatever they weigh? Because they drop like torpedoes all night long, all day long up there, and I don't want to spend a bunch of money on buildings that host solar panels when you've got bombardiers that are going to be there forever because it's a bird refuge, and it's a serious problem. I mean, you can drive around and look at the concrete, the pavement everywhere. It's got crushed shells all over it, and they aren't crushed because the cars are over them. It's from when they hit the ground. The bird eats it. So I don't know that these solar panels are that tough. Maybe they are, but I certainly would be asking the solar panel companies before we spent money on structuring these buildings anywhere in Blaine, from the railroad tracks out, to host solar panels, to make sure that they can take the abuse that they're going to get.
Yep.
I mean, the city of Blaine has spent quite a bit of money over on their sewage treatment plant over there trying to figure out how to keep the birds away from there for two reasons. One, the poop all over the building, plus they're dropping those clams on those tin roofs and it dents them all up. So, I mean, there is a problem there with the wildlife. So I would urge that we talk to the solar panel people and see just what they can withstand.
What's the additional cost?
I don't think there's much at all, commissioners, but it introduces, solar panels we think introduce about 5 pounds per square foot to a roof load. And that may or may not be within the contingency already built in the design. But in some cases, it may alter what we build. I don't know if it does on this one yet, but and before I spend money evaluating it, I want to check in with you guys, so.
Yeah, I have no problem with the, I do think it's a very small incremental cost. So designing it that way is no problem. Building it that way is no problem. But I do think we need to answer some of the other questions like the bombardier and poop issues. I've replaced a daughter's windshield because it was bombardiered while we were up there. So
Yeah.
I understand the issue. But
Yeah.
yeah, head nodded.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the project team. John Gibson, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Gibson, project engineer. As Adam mentioned, I wanted to go into a little bit more detail on some of the site work that we're looking at doing. And we really do want to take a regional perspective on this. We were given 2 projects in 2018 that are in this area. The first one is about $140,000. And that was to pave another small section of pavement between pump houses 2 and 3. As Adam mentioned, there's a threshold of 5,000 square feet after which you need to do stormwater treatment. And so technically, we could continue down that path of just a patchwork treatment of that failing asphalt. But logically, we feel like it makes more sense for the port to take a larger comprehensive fix there. And you know, that has a little bit to do with our stance as a environmentally friendly organization that takes its responsibilities seriously. The letter of the law might say that 5,000 square feet is the threshold, but we have a parking lot there with vehicles traveling through it every day, and that feeds directly into the bay. So we felt like we have an opportunity here to basically do the right thing and go the extra mile with some proper treatment. So on this next slide, I'm just going to give a quick view of what that treatment might entail. Over here on Milholland Road and Marine Drive, you can picture that we've got a nice grassy strip there already, and the pavement already slopes into that. What we'd like to put in there is something called CAVS, C-A-V-F-S, that's compost amended vegetated filter strip. And it's actually a very attractive option because it's low impact, it's very sustainable, we don't need to spend a lot of time and money maintaining it over the years, and it's a passive system, so the water will just flow through it and emerge clean and then continue on its way through the existing infrastructure. Moving on to the west side of the site.
John, one second. On that strip you're speaking of that goes around there, is there something that sticks up that protects that, or is it flush with the ground? Will it be still flush with the?
It's essentially flush with the ground. There's a small buffer of gravel before it reaches that compost strip, but there's no impediment to travel other than that.
Thank you.
So continuing here on the west side of the site, this is a great opportunity in my mind. It's kind of a win-win solution, and I just love the simplicity of it. As Adam mentioned, we could, do the standard thing where we've got a development here, and we could put in a sidewalk and a curb and gutter and the landscaping. You've seen it 100 times. In our minds, that's not a great solution. That's just giving us a sidewalk to this outdoor storage yard, essentially a sidewalk to nowhere. And it also puts all of the pedestrians and bicyclists in harm's way. We've got trucks and trailers pulling through there. So a better solution, we think, is to go ahead and put in a trail that connects our existing infrastructure. It kind of fills a critical gap there. And so that would start right here in the corner of the parking lot and continue all the way through along the waterway and ultimately connect to the existing boat launch restrooms. What this would entail is some landscaped areas and then a very short 2-foot retaining wall. After that, the water would drop down into a biofiltration cell, and it would eventually make its way through an outlet into the bay as clean water, ready for release. What's great about this is that we're using the same real estate for two benefits. We're getting the environmental benefit, and we're also providing a huge improvement for the public to be able to walk through that space.
John, I'm not sure if this is where you're looking for a head nod, but this is brilliant. To have to work in a warehouse where you've got to contend with traffic coming in front of your building and constantly driving through driveways, worried about who you're going to hit next. If you can divert them to the side where you don't have that possibility, that's a huge improvement.
Thank you.
Yeah, love it.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
What's the intended surface for the trail?
It would just be a gravel trail to begin with. We have talked about possibly installing some conduit for future lighting, but we wanted to, we didn't want to do so much there that we ended up pricing ourselves out of the option. And that's something that we could definitely continue to dialogue with the commission about. No, conduit is very affordable. And I think that we've got a couple of kind of rest areas built in, one here at the corner and one at the midpoint with some benches.
I would suggest when you're planning that, if we're making this a trail, and as dark as it is in the winter months early on and people are using it, that we should try and fit in some lighting along there for the folks.
Thank you.
I think we see the success of the trails around here as a great example. They draw people here, they increase public awareness of what the port is doing and our presence, and that we, in Blaine, we're spending a considerable amount of money on cleanups and building projects and outfitting this area to be both successful economically, but it's also our interest that it's just a benefit for the whole community. I think that's what Squalicum does, and I think that's the vision you're articulating here. Great.
Thank you. One other minor detail that I thought was worth mentioning was that web houses 1, 2, and 3 will all have pretty sizable roofs, and obviously we get plenty of rainwater here. So the design team has come up with a way to capture that water when it leaves the roof and go ahead, and that will get sent straight to the bay since it's a non-pollution generating surface, and that will reduce the amount of treatment that we have to do. I'm going to skip a few slides here that our architect, Jeff McClure, is going to come back to. I just wanted to go ahead and, while we're on the topic, and talk about some possible phasing. The simplest approach would be to go ahead and design, permit, and construct all of this at once. But as I'm going to show you in some later slides, we are going to be coming up against some possible budget complications there. So one workaround there is to take a phased approach to the stormwater. And as you can see on your monitors, we would basically design and permit everything now that was necessary for all 3 buildings. But we would only construct the walking path, the biofiltration swales, and the pavement for Web House 1. And then the rest of the cab system and the pavement between Web Houses 2 and 3, that would be deferred till an out year pending Commission approval of additional funds. The reason that we broke this into the 2 phases, as you can see there, is that we thought it made sense to just go ahead and get the trail in. No sense in getting it halfway started. And the other thing to mention is that eventually, if another web house is constructed in this area, that biofiltration swale could continue to the south. So let's just take a quick look at the budget. The Commission has approved $2.6 million for this project. And if you factor in the additional amount for the paving between the web houses, that's $142,000. And then factor out what we're going to need to spend demolishing existing web house number 1, as well as the port soft costs. We've basically got $2,456,000 to work with here. This is a basic summary of the anticipated cost for the building itself, as well as the site work broken into 2 phases. And if you go through the math, basically if we did this in 2 phases, we would be running a deficit of around $350,000 this year. And I should note that little asterisk down below that if we did a second phase, there are some benefits. It's maybe a lower impact to the fishermen this year as far as sequencing all of this work that needs to occur while it's sunny. But we would be paying the contractor for 2 mobilizations, and so that would incur a modest increase in the price. And I guess if the commission was interested in just continuing to do this as one single project, that would end up being a budget deficit of around $715,000. So a fairly considerable increase, but that's why we wanted to come before you today and get your input on whether we're heading in the right direction or if we need to change our approach a little bit. Now, before we go on with that conversation, unless the commission has any questions or wants to have some debate now.
I do have some questions. The incurred cost, we're going to incur that anyways to complete the project, right?
Correct.
And if we split it into 2 parts, we're going to incur more cost yet.
Yes.
Okay. For our time frame of having this project done after the first, or right after the first of the year, the actual web house itself, is that still on track if it's split into the 2?
Yes, sir, it is still on track. I've got the schedule here, and the major takeaway here is that we're still targeting to start construction in September and be done by mid-January 2019. We're still working with the stakeholders as well as the harbor master to sequence that in a way that works. We want to make sure that the existing tenants have plenty of time to move and that it's as convenient as possible for them.
So a further question. Can we back up again? You can explain a little clearer. I kind of missed it, I guess, exactly what phase 1 and phase 2 involve, the difference?
Thank you for that. So on your monitors there, phase 1 is essentially everything that's required for web house number 1. Plus a little bit of extra trail. So everything to what would be the south or the right on your screens is the improvements that would be necessary as part of the permitting process. And as you would imagine, the filtration that's required is directly related to the amount of new impervious surface that we're putting in. So the design team has put together some projections saying that this is the extent of the trail system and the filtration system that would be involved. And what's shown on your screen there is enough for all 3 web houses on that side. Now what phase 2 does is it includes that CAV system, CAVFS, and that's up on Marine Drive in Mill Holland. And it also includes the paving all around Web House 3.
Okay.
So another little note about the paving there. What we have right now is failing, and that's due to 2 factors. One is that we have a lot of standing water because it's not well graded, and so that water compromises the pavement. It weakens it, it gets in there and freezes and goes through that freeze-thaw cycle. The other problem that we have is just an unsuitable subgrade. As Adam mentioned before, we're sitting on dredge spoils, and it's just not structurally holding up the pavement and the loads that are being placed on it. So the budget that I showed you anticipates us excavating all of that and putting in a proper structural subgrade so that it can handle what we're driving over it, and it lasts a long time.
So for clarification, we've got 2 number 1 web houses on this screen. Which one are you calling number 1 and number 3?
I apologize for that typo, Commissioner. Web house number 3 is closest to Marine Drive, so that's a mislabel there.
Okay.
That was confusing to me.
And when you say with the 2-phase part, you're going to try not to disrupt activity around there? It seems to me, if I recollect correctly, once we get past the first of the year, there's not a whole lot of activity in Blaine. As far as that web locker usage, it's pretty minimal. If we wait to do the second phase further on, as we get into the spring, you're gonna run into more disruption, and Andy can probably attest to that. So just maybe keep that in mind, that the best time is in the winter.
That makes sense.
For disruption there.
We've got a little bit of a race against the clock, not only due to weather, but also, as you know, the asphalt plants close down starting in mid-December typically. And so we need to, if we're going to pave, we need to get it done before those two things come into play.
But overall, I think it's a great plan. I've never been about doing part now and doing the rest later, because it never seems to end up really well done when you break things up. And it usually costs more money. So, but a great job on the design.
Thank you. Unless there are any further questions, I'd like to hand things over to Jeff McClure for a little while. He's going to go into some more details about the actual building. Thank you.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
So,
We'll take 5 minutes.
page down, page up.
Yeah, and before, look, as he finishes his presentation, then we'll take a break.
Hi, Jeff McClure with RMC Architects. We've had a great time working with the team on this project. We always are appreciative of the opportunities to work in the working waterfront and create some new infrastructure for that. After we got the necessary preliminary work done, survey, geotechnical, and that sort of thing, we had an opportunity to meet with some of the stakeholders and have a good discussion about what works and what doesn't work in the existing Web House 1. Commissioner Briscoe was able to participate in that along with another a dozen or so people. And the takeaway from that is that we need a simple, durable building that's going to stand the test of time. And so we didn't really try to recreate the wheels. As a matter of fact, the plan that you see in front of you is pretty much a duplication of the Web House 1 that will be torn down. So the size is virtually the same. About 24,000 square feet. Each of the suites, as you can see, and you'll see in the section on the next slide, has an 8-foot mezzanine along the back. It just kind of increases the functionality and the storage and utility of these particular buildings. Nope, wrong one. There we go. So as you can see here, this is a classic web house shape with the cross section that goes through the middle of it. Enclosed web lockers that are about 18 feet wide, 33 feet long, with 20-foot long outdoor covered storage areas. It really increases the functionality and utility of these particular structures. One of the things that we're doing here is we're intending to frame this using metal studs to increase the durability and the longevity of the project. We're also, and you'll be able to see this in other slides, is that we're raising the construction up on concrete stub walls. So the first 3 feet is where a lot of that wear starts to occur, because there's a lot of rough and tumble storage that goes on here, is now protecting the structure and lifts the structure off out of the splash zone, so it increases the durability. We also are, by code, putting a 3-hour fire barrier down the center spine of the building at the ridge. So it basically divides the building into two sides, 12,000 square feet, which is the maximum that we can get in a non-sprinklered building. And we intentionally stayed away from a dry sprinkler system, not because of the cost. Frankly, it's not that expensive. It's just that it's another piece of infrastructure that has a tendency to get damaged when forklifts are around and things like that. So we have divided the building into two halves, basically, with this fire barrier wall going down the center, because we are storing a lot of combustible items that need to be protected from one another, and also we'll have adequate smoke detection systems so that we'll be able to forecast if there are any problems in any of these any of these particular areas. This is just a slide of existing conditions. Web House 3 is on the left, Web House 2 is in the middle, and the existing Web House 1 is on the right-hand side. The shape, part of, I think, from a design perspective, some of my favorite parts of the working waterfront are kind of the repeating rhythm of these web houses, and certainly Web House 2 in the center is the one that kind of creates the kind of that iconic, how would you say, shape of a web house, and that's really what we're trying to duplicate here in the web house that we're doing. We're taking a little bit of different tack on the materials, but for the most part, kind of we're adopting the same particular shape. On the lower portion, that is a view of the existing conditions from one of the overlooks up in Blaine. I believe it's H Street, because even though this is a marine-related, fairly utilitarian building, we still have to go through design review with the City of Blaine, and we're currently in that process right now, as well as in shoreline substantial development permit review. And subsequent slides, I think John already advanced it, shows our building kind of set in the context of what's there today. So this is a CAD model and then an end view of the building. One of the things we wanted to show here, as you can see, first off, this wear course is 3-foot-high concrete band around the building, so it will take the wear and tear from frequent forklift traffic and things like that. But we're also articulating the end with some windows. Again, from a design review perspective, it's important what these buildings look like from the end, and it's in exchange for some other design review requirements that we're working through in the city in terms of building articulation, things like that. One of the other things we also wanted to do was connect these buildings to the history of the waterfront. Andy Peterson did some research on some of the fish can labels that were available from the Boundary Cannery on Semiahmoo Spit. And although it's difficult to see here, this is a replica that's been painted onto a piece of aluminum and attached to the side of the building. We're hoping to find other examples of these historic cannery labels that were represented in this same cannery that we can use as this historic connection to the waterfront. Yes?
I can help you with that. I still have some of the leather-bound label.
Excellent.
Books at home that were both from APA and from the south side here.
Great. We'd like to include these because they're really quite interesting, and I think people would really react well to them. And aside from that, just we do want to start numbering the web houses so people are referring to them in the appropriate fashion. It's just another way to kind of identify what's going on in this particular area. This then is a little closer look at what Web House 1 would look like in the context with Web House 2 and 3 and the other development in and around the marina. And as you can see, it just fits in very well, and I don't think that there are going to be any challenges to sight lines or things like that. And then finally, I think we've gone through this and the schedule, and then a little closer take on how this would fit into the existing context.
I have nothing more, Mr. Briscoe.
Jeff, you've done a great job here with this, and I appreciated your time spent in the meetings. It was very good. I guess I should lean forward so they can hear me. It's nice to see this day and age that somebody recognizes something that works and is willing to make it a little bit better and make it look good and put it back to work as it has done for about 40 or 50 years. I'd commend you on the job you've done. I have a question, maybe we're kind of for Andy on this. I see the storage yard. Is that going to, would we turn that, I guess, to be southwest, run it the same way the web locker is out in front of it to open up more ground to the, towards the boat launch for folks if we needed overflow parking or folks can do small events on the grass over there? Is that in the?
We have, it's a little difficult to see here on this, and would you like to talk to this point?
Sure.
Okay,
I can
good.
speak to that real quick.
All right.
Andy Peterson, Harbor Master at Blaine Harbor. So I think what the commissioner is referring to is this, if you look on your graphic, I think you can follow the arrow here. One of the considerations that we had at this time was to extend the storage yard south, which is highlighted by a dotted line here. So there is one option of potentially extending the storage yard. Actually, it's more southeast towards the existing boat launch restrooms here. And then that would be another option of extending it, of reconfiguring the storage yard and running it parallel to the new Web House number 1 as well.
Yeah, would that not leave that end open for the public more down there for various things?
That is correct, yes.
I would probably recommend that would be something we would think about doing.
I like that one much better, yeah. I think putting it parallel to the Web Houses kind of makes it like a fourth Web House and keeps the public area next to the water.
Right, and you can still enter from either end of it that way and circular loop drive through it and not be in the way of the boaters doing their stuff, so.
Excellent, thank you for the input.
And I have no more questions. Jeff, thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Mr. Ship. That we are going to take, what, a 10-minute recess. We will convene back here at 5 minutes after 6 and start with a public comment period. Reconvene.
Must be hungry.
Okay, I'd like to reconvene the Tuesday, June 5th Port of Bellingham Commissioners meeting. As we reconvene, we've got time for public comment. Anybody who wishes to comment before the port. We don't have anybody signed up, so if you do, please hold your comments to 3 minutes. Anybody wishing to speak before the commission? Seeing none, we will close the public comment period and move on to action items. Some people's kids.
So, hi, my name is Eddie Uri. I'm the Clean Energy Program Manager at Resources for Sustainable Communities, also a member of the Bellingham Blue-Green Waterfront Coalition. So I know I came to you with some criticism last meeting and thought I'd start out this time with some words of encouragement, things I like to see that you're doing. The district utility, district energy and water call for a request for qualifications in that process, just absolutely thrilled, happy to see that that's moving forward in a concrete way. I understood that,
No pun intended?
What was that?
The concrete way, no pun intended?
Oh, yeah. No pun intended. Moving forward, and I understand the process has been pushed back to announce who the qualified applicant will be. We're looking forward to seeing that and seeing a plan developed. I think when we're looking at district energy and water, we shouldn't overlook the potential that the ASB has to factor into that. I know there needs to be studies and research into the possibility here, but we have seen it other places. In Toronto, for example, where a stationary water source is used as a geothermal source for energy, whereas the water in a pond is going to maintain a temperature cooler than the air in the summer, warmer than the air in the winter, and through use of refrigerant chemicals and such, you can transfer energy that can be routed into a district energy system. There's dangers to putting that kind of thing out in the bay, but when you have a protected area like is already built in the ASB, there's some potential there. I think it could be looked at. Also think the same area could be a great place to put solar panels and could even be above such a geothermal facility that was connected. Granted, all this stuff needs to be studied, but there's some potential there. I'd like to see it get looked at by the working group. Also add that really happy to see this resolution looking into the use of biofuels for operating vessels and vehicles that you'll be talking about coming up next. I'll say that I think that's a great step as someone who, for a few years, I drove a vehicle that I ran on B99 biodiesel and never had any problems with it. It worked out great. So I think if you got a good source for it, I know it's manufactured locally in the area here in Skagit County from waste vegetable oil from local restaurants. I think it's a great sort of close the loop way that you can reduce the impact of your operations in the port. So hope to see that that's determined to be practical. And I understand it can be purchased on par with conventional diesel as well, and should be cost effective. So. And then I'll just add the Waterfront District Update Plan, these proposed revisions that you applied to have updated it's been sent to the city. My understanding from talking to some city council members is that there's interest in looking a little further into that, revisiting some parts of the sub-area plan and the development regulations for the Waterfront District, and particularly around the area of green energy and green building. I think it seems like the development regulations in that section, though they seem to follow from some nice language that was in the master plan to encourage sustainable design, don't really come through to the standards that are reasonable and cost effective for where we're at here in 2018. And I'm disappointed to see that the hardcore developments that are taking place so far are not at a higher standard for energy and water efficiency than what they could be. And we know that this isn't like a hypothetical thing that can't be done or has to be really expensive. We know LEED certification is an expensive process, but there's actually other ways to build, and we're seeing it happen right now, where you have homes in Bellingham that are energy positive, producing more off their roof than they're consuming, and were built for less than 150 a square foot right here in Bellingham. That's happened. Larger scale buildings, that there's different factors there, but there's new standards out there. There's new codes being looked at. I encourage you to look to Architecture 2030 as a firm with some great design standards. There's Passive House. There's Built Green. There's ways it can be done. And when we're looking at selling off land that you own, that you control, as long as there's a developer there willing to do it, there seems to be no reason why we shouldn't be able to hold them to a higher standard and build things that we can be proud of that will last for a long time down there at the waterfront, and ultimately be more cost effective in the long run when all you save on energy and water over time does pay for itself. And having solar panels on the roofs of all new development also saves a lot of money in the long run if you take that long angle view. So just wrapping it up here, I know City Council is interested in this. I know any changes to sub-area plan need your approval as well. So I encourage you to reach out and talk to them. I know there's been some discussion between Commissioner Shepard and some of the council members already. I'd like to invite the other commissioners to come in and engage in this. And there's a little bit of a challenge because we can't meet with you all at once unless we want to call a public meeting. Also open to doing that, calling a public meeting, having that discussion, getting everyone together. So I'd like to talk to you about it. Thanks. I don't know if I'm over time here, but okay. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, and we'll see if we can't make that happen. Thanks.
I did have a question.
Go.
Eddie? Oh, yes. What do you think of the solid timber buildings that are being put up around the country? What's your, the whole thing's built out of lamb beams? What do they call it?
Cross-laminated.
Yeah, the cross member.
I don't know much about it. Yeah.
Maybe talk with Donald. They should look into that a little bit, maybe.
Great. Yeah, should do that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Move on to the action items. We'll start with number 1.
A motion to approve resolution number 1375 pursuant to RCW 43-19-648 and WAC Chapter 194-29, determining the practicality of using 100% biofuels and electricity for operating the port's vessels, vehicles, and construction equipment.
And my understanding is, Mr. Schmelik, you have to weigh in on this. When his name is on the agenda, it makes me want.
You got 3 minutes?
We could have.
Well, I do have to tell you one thing.
We could retrofit the entire fleet for what it's going to cost him.
I sit here next to the port auditor. And so you see me typing away on my computer. When I'm at a port meeting and there is some port staff person needs some work done, I work on it. And I tell the auditor that it's great because I can bill twice, once for being at the meeting, once for doing the work, which you really can't. You can only bill one time. So when you see me type it, I'm not sending emails to my friends. I was working on a non-disclosure agreement for the marine terminals folks while I was sitting here. So it is be more cost effective.
Thank you.
Anyway, in 2013, the legislature passed this statute, and it was primarily aimed at agencies who use more than 200,000 gallons of fuel in a year in all state agencies. And it mandated a move towards biofuels and electrically powered vehicles. But it did require that all other agencies at least take a look at it and determine to the extent practicable whether they could do that. The Department of Commerce passed the WAC rules that you saw, and they recognize that for most smaller governments like ports, the decision's going to be made during an acquisition time, that you're going to consider life cycle issues, the availability of biofuels or electric vehicles, charging stations, those kinds of things. So this resolution does that for you, tells you that you will make those life cycle decisions when you acquire equipment. It does allow you to exempt out emergency vehicles, and the port does have some emergency vehicles at the airport. And if you've seen those, are pretty large vehicles, so I don't know if there are any electric fire trucks or biofuel diesel fire trucks, but in any event, it does exempt those out, which is also allowed by statute. So you're complying with the law, and then there is a part in the WAC that tells governments how to do that practical analysis. Further on in the WAC, there's a provision that says, here's what you look at when you're buying things or trying to retrofit things. Although the Department of Commerce says, really, it's going to be acquisition decisions that are made by smaller governments. So there you go. You're being in compliance with the law. Any questions?
So what's the time frame on a decision here? So this is going to set in motion a process to determine the practicality?
From here on out, every time you acquire something, you have to kind of look at the practicality of.
So we're going to do it on a case-by-case basis?
We're going to do it as a replacement basis for existing fleet. And, you know, the practicality of it will be if we're replacing a truck that pulls a trailer and carries a bunch of lawnmowers, there's probably not an electrical vehicle that can meet that criteria. If we're replacing one of the Prius or one of the smaller pickup trucks that we just use to commute around, then that can probably be replaced by an electric vehicle. That's how we're viewing it.
Do you have a ballpark on what percentage of our fleet is diesel-powered compared to gas?
Oh, I don't. I have no clue. I can get you that, though. We can certainly look into that. We'll get you a breakdown of the fleet, what are trucks, what are vehicles, and what the life of them are. We tend to run our vehicles for a lot longer than their useful life. We get a lot of years out of our vehicles.
Yeah. Okay. Well, certainly for when you're thinking big vehicles isn't necessarily a detriment to running on biofuels. SSC has their whole fleet is on biofuels. But for the emergency responder ones, there might be a different, need there. And what I was looking at for the effectiveness of this piece of legislation, it seems to mostly be missing the mark. I think it's encouraging some municipalities to take some steps, and maybe incrementally, organizations like ours are going to evaluate and think through our replacement practices. But overall, it seems that only 5 to 6% of the statewide fleet has gone either to biofuels or electric. With, you've got the city of Seattle, which has opted for. They've gone for over 25% of their fleet, but really nobody else has even achieved close to what they've done. So I think it's a good opportunity. Some of it's chicken and egg. Do we replace first, or do we build the charging network first? And we just got an electric car at our home, so we're thinking about this all the time. Where's the charging networks now? And it's I think it's certainly something we're going to see in terms of consumer demand at our properties, and whenever we can co-locate something that is meets a public need, public amenity, and we can utilize for some of our own charging, that I think would be a nice opportunity. Only about 1% of the vehicles in Washington State are electric out of the 2.7 million, but between 2013 and 2017, that number tripled. And so it's something that's definitely on the increase. And when we're looking at the places of transportation, whether it's our airport or our train station, our marinas, those are some prime locations for those electric charging facilities.
You're going to see in the 2019 budget some proposals for some electric charging stations. So in the public facilities you're talking about is exactly what we're targeting for now.
And so from here on, after when the port buys vehicles, the justification will have to include an analysis. And I think that's what the legislature want to take a look at. Now, larger governments over 200,000 gallons a year have a reporting requirement in addition to this. But what the legislature wanted was every time a government buys something, they say, is there an electric biofuel alternative we can get a hold of? Same, life cycle cost analysis. So that's going to be part of every acquisition from here on out.
Thank you, Frank.
Any other comments? No. Would you read the motion, please?
A motion to approve resolution number 1375 pursuant to RCW 43.19.648 and WAC Chapter 194.29, determining the practicality of using 100% biofuels and electricity for operating the port's vessels, vehicles, and construction equipment.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Briscoe?
Aye.
Commissioner Bell is aye. Action item number 2.
A motion to authorize the executive director to enter into agreements with event organizers to close port parks and hold private events for up to 3 uses per year.
Commissioners, this one's mine. I put this on the agenda after getting some feedback that it wasn't on the agenda in May. I take full responsibility for it not being on the agenda. It was on the agenda May 1st. We had a brief discussion about that. Tiffany presented. You all wanted some time to think about it and come back to us. We brought it back up then after a public comment period. An individual came and testified. We brought it back up and discussed it and then voted on it. You were in your legal right to do so. It probably would have been a little cleaner had I put that on the agenda, so I apologize for that, but this is kind of a make-up call. I put it on the agenda this time, so if there's anything further you wanted to discuss on this, just a status update as to where we are today. You approved one event in August. Mr. Dixon, I believe, is the name of the promoter of that event, and he's going forward with that event. We had a second event that actually came to us before that one, requesting the use of the park. We kind of settled with them on a partial closure of the park, and as far as I know, that's where that one stands today. I keep expecting that individual to come back to us and say, well, you allowed Mr. Dixon to close the park. How come I can't close the park? To my knowledge, that hasn't happened yet. So the reason I'm asking for this authorization, in case that individual does come back and say, look, you did it for the August event. I want my event in September to be closed as well. I'm also okay if you want to punt this down the road and just leave the 2 events as they are today as trial cases, and then we can revisit this in the fall and see how they worked out and what kind of feedback we get.
Yeah, my questions are, one is, what I've always had articulated to me is that you've had this authority all along.
I believe the 1106, my annual delegation of authority allows me to close a park and have an event. I brought it to you because sometimes we do that. We look at something and think, okay, the commissioner should weigh in on this, even though I have the authority to approve it. But I believe I do have that authority, yes.
I'm personally more in favor of pushing this decision down the road. I think that it would be more prudent for us to have some examples of, did this go well? Did this not go well? What have we learned? What do we need to consider if we've actually had some events? And being that these events are not very far off, if we push this to October, it allows us to have more time for people to contribute and public comment, be prepared for making statements, and just gives us something practical to discuss. Because right now we're just kind of being asked to really go on a hypothetical, I feel.
I would agree we need to push it down the road, but I'd like to state some of the reasons why I say that. We did something we don't usually do at the last meeting. It's raised some controversy, and maybe rightly so. I'm not entirely sure of that. We have 2 events scheduled, and I believe we should wait till at least after those events are done, and we have some time to analyze it, which I was thinking the second meeting in September. I think in the meantime, I would like the commission to together maybe ask staff to come up with some, which parks, if we do this in the future, we're going to do it with. Would it be for all of them or certain parks? What kind of events are we going to allow? We really don't have any real ground rules for this area, and I really don't think it's fair for the commission to put this on our executive director's shoulders to figure out each time. So I would like to have staff prepare something over the summer, if possible, or in the fall, some kind of guidelines for everybody, so we kind of know where we're at. But those are my reasons, and I'm still not fond of the idea of closing off public access to the public for profit to an individual company. I still can't digest that very well. So I certainly would like more time to digest that, and I've heard from numerous folks since the last meeting that are having trouble digesting it also. So I'd just like to, that we remove this from the action items and we move it on down the road and give everybody time to digest what's gone on and what they would like to go on in the future, and that would give the public more time to become aware of potential possibility of closing some of our parks for these types of events and have them weigh in on it. I think that if we did something on this action item now, it would be too soon. So I would concur with Commissioner Shepherd that we move this to some point in the fall.
That being said by both of you, there was one item left on the table that I think the director needs some guidance on, and that is whether or not if he gets a request back from this organizer in the second event to close off the entire park instead of it just being a partial, that he has the authority to go ahead and do that on the second event.
And the concern is she was actually the first event because she submitted her application far before the other one. He just came and gave public comment at the last one, got his event in front of you, and that's how that came about.
So I believe we owe him an answer on that moving forward.
Is it her?
Yeah, Ms. Trammell, I believe, yes.
Did she originally request the entire park closed? Okay,
It's just,
I can hear you. So she did not request that the entire park be closed in her original
but
request?
she didn't
so
know
I
it
don't-
was an option, so. I'm just saying.
I'm sorry, I was under the impression she had asked for the park to be closed, so I'm a little confused.
Tiffany DeSimone, Meetings and Events. She didn't request the entire park being closed. When she came to us, originally, I think it was in September, she said, can I have the event? And we said, you're going to probably have to fence off the grass area so people will still have access around the promenade at Zuanich.
Okay, so, and she's already entered into an agreement with us on this?
She does not have her application in. She has paid her deposit, which is part of the process of confirming her reservation.
And she was under the impression at that time that she would just be fencing off the grass area and so
Correct.
forth. I would recommend that we leave things as be. If we were to change that now, it would be like taking another vote, so to speak, and I don't know that that would be wise. Certainly if the young lady comes to you and is very upset or whatever, I mean, we could talk about it again, but right now, I personally would like to leave things as they are.
Yeah, not having an application, it seems, it's harder for me to vote on something when we don't even have an application. We've just got a maybe of what she wants to do, and the maybe of what she wants to do sounds like it's already sufficient for her. So,
This no application has come up a couple times now in emails back and forth. We hold spots because someone gives us a deposit. We don't require the application to hold the spot.
We do. We require several pieces of paperwork in order to open the doors and allow somebody in. And unless we have all of those, the event wouldn't go forward. We continue to ask her for the rest of the application, the rest of the package. She was supposed to come in last week. She didn't. This is kind of how event planning goes. People have pretty good ideas, and they get halfway into the process, and they look for sponsors and funding and all of that. So
It's possible this may
So-
not even happen.
perhaps
Is her money refundable if that's the case?
her money is, that first half is non-refundable.
Okay.
And that being said, I do commit this from a little different perspective than what you've heard, and that is that I do believe that when you allow the private sector to come in and utilize the park in this manner, you do increase some economic activity, and you do invite people down to the waterfront that wouldn't normally come. And you create activity that will be beneficial to not only the restaurants, but also the neighboring businesses. And I think people who don't normally come to the waterfront might come to the waterfront and see the asset that we have. And I think that's the best utilization of this, albeit even just for a day. And I think everyone benefits. And I think part of our job is to create economic activity, and leaving a park 365 days a year as a park does not accomplish that mission for me. And I really don't have a problem with the private sector coming in and saying, we have a way to utilize one of your assets. To me, it would be, we have the private sector in almost every other part of the port. Matter of fact, the fishing community is the private sector, as it were, utilizing our docks. So to demonize the private sector because it wants to do something on a park is I think, the wrong avenue. That being said, I'm fine with deferring this and fine with allowing the application to go forward as it's processed. If she comes back and wants to change that, then we'll address it at that time. That being said, I don't think we need a vote. We can just defer this to the second meeting in September.
Sounds good.
Thank you. So who's ever in charge of the screen?
Oh, advance.
Was that you?
Advance the screen, please.
Nothing, I just,
Take it off.
now we'll move to action item number 3.
A motion to approve an airport industrial park ground lease agreement with Whatcom County for property located at the airport industrial park.
Hi, Commissioner Shirley McFerrin, Real Estate Director. Good evening.
Scared me.
I would like to point out that Rob Nye is in the audience. Rob is the Facilities Director for Whatcom County. And I have to tell you that he just got a text from County Executive Jack Louse wanting to know if this transaction was approved. So I wanted to let you know that.
Is Uncle Jack nervous?
Would you please ask the county executive to look at YouTube? He could be watching this live. Would you let him know?
Thanks for that. Whatcom County built this building in 1981, and it was intended to house training for our disabled community. And it operated in that fashion for many, many years. Current Industries was a nonprofit agency that teamed up with the county, and then Chinook Enterprise also. Chinook terminated its lease with the port in 2016, and therefore the ground lease terminated between Chinook and the Port of Bellingham. In 2017, the Port Commission agreed to enter into an interlocal agreement with Whatcom County where the Port Real Estate Division would market that facility and hopefully secure a tenant. And while we did have a couple of interested folks, we were never able to actually lease it. So now the county has indicated a desire to lease the building and occupy the facility for its own facility management operation. In an email, Mr. Nye told me that they would have probably about 16 employees operating in the facility. And the reason for the expansion is to undertake reinvestment in existing capital facilities. This is a 5-year lease with 2 5-year renewal options. The rental rate for the first 2 years is set at fair market value using our 9% rate of return. The second year, it increases an additional 5%, which reflects fair market value, and we would renegotiate the lease for renewal periods. And it is a staff recommendation to move forward with the lease. Do you have any questions?
Mr. Shepherd, none? Mr. Briscoe?
I have one.
Okay.
The 16 employees mentioned, are those relocated employees from another division in Whatcom County, or are they new people?
That's relocated, existing staff, but over the first 5 years of the lease, it's intended probably to increase to about 20 employees. So we hope to add an additional maybe 4 employees out there. And Mr. Nye, come on up.
Of that 16, 3 will be new. So with this move, the reason for this move is we're expanding our staff in order to undertake our capital facilities effort. So we have about 15 now, or 13 now. I just hired one today. I have nowhere to put them. And so this is the idea, is we have to be able to have a place to house these additional staff.
Thank you. I always like to check when I hear the employee numbers to make sure we're adding some jobs rather than just shuffling people around. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and it'll be really nice to have additional activity out at the Airport Industrial Park. So this will be increase some folks and some activity out there.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
So would you do me a favor? Would you text the county executive and say, uh-oh, I think Mr. Bell is going to go sideways on us? I just want to see his response. Just say, I think Ken's going to be an issue. That being said,
He's probably watching you.
that being said, all in favor?
Aye. Send it.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Action item number 4.
A motion to approve a renewal and modification of lease between the Port of Bellingham and Reisner Distributor, Inc.
Commissioners, Terry Lahi, real estate representative. In 2005, the Port and Reisner Distributors entered into a lease agreement for property on Rhoder Avenue, about 1.23 acres. Currently, the Port has identified a portion of that property as a good place to, or the potential option to relocate its marine storage yard. So this renewal and modification takes that into account and basically reduces the leased premises to just over half an acre. This will be effective August 1st. With that comes a reduction in rents. It also renews the lease for 5 years, beginning September 1, and then also updates other standard clauses of our leases to our current verbiage. Staff certainly recommends approval of this transaction. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
And what about the tenant? How do they feel about this?
They're okay with this move, yes.
Space they were actively using?
No. This is a gravel area next to them. It was part of their lease, the initial lease. We had to do some cleanup the initial couple of years. Following that, they've been paying us rent on it, but they really don't have an active use for it now.
Yeah, can pull up Google Earth if you need. There you go. It's right across from cold storage. It's their temporary parking lot. So it's where we're going to move the marine trade storage.
Yeah, so this is temporary.
So they're letting it go. They're giving it. Reisner is giving it back to us.
Okay, I got it backwards. I was reading backwards. Late in the day.
It's the last item.
Right over here.
That's okay, Terry.
Okay.
I understand. I'm here to deal with that.
More discussion?
Don't hit me with the hammer anymore, please.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any on other business? Commissioner Shepard?
Yes, I wanted to, I saw that Gina was here in the audience. Gina, I don't know your last name, but Gina's a new member of our economic development team, and I just wanted to welcome you to the port and congratulate you on your new position. What's your last name, Gina? Stark.
Okay. And Gina doesn't know this, but employee attends their first commission meeting, they're supposed to sing a song.
It's karaoke night.
That's great.
Thank you. I'll prepare something maybe for the next one.
Yeah.
Don't worry, there'll be lots of surprises in this job.
Yeah.
And therapy.
Really? Where do we get that at?
That comes with the turf.
I had one quick thank you. I meant to do it last week, last meeting, to Adam and Mike and Brian, who helped me host bravely and with fun and class and lots of great activity, 60 middle school students here. It was no easy task to make a productive program that really captures interest for that age group at all. But these guys really did, and it was fun. The students learned a lot. They got to think about college and career pathways and the role of the port. We even got to go on a tour of All American Marine and see their ships in progress and walk on them and everything. So it was a really nice afternoon, and I know it takes extra work for you guys, so thank you for your help there.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh,
I thought you were done.
no, I got a couple more. The last meeting, I also didn't commend our Rob and our staff for closing the sale with Harcourt. It kind of came and went, but everything materialized on time. The payment was received, and it's no small feat. And it really sets forward the pathway to sale of property that we've spent a long time improving, cleaning, getting ready, and we're excited to see the future plans for there, and excited to see that Harcourt is really taking a more significant presence in our community. And I see we've got John here in our audience as well. So looking forward to that.
Tony
Tony,
Galena.
thank you.
And I think the sigh of relief from our executive director was heard around the county.
I think so. I think so. And my,
Good job, Rob.
Yeah.
And Brian.
It's
Oh, he's
been
here
a
tonight, that's
major
right.
team effort. And my last is, I think for a future meeting, I'd like to put on, get an update on the rules and regulations for the GA community at the airport, just to get an update. I'm interested in hearing where we are with that process, how the negotiations are going, and I had a really productive tour of some of the hangars, and I've had a lot of conversation with a number of folks from the community. I know they've reached out to some of you guys as well, and I want to make sure we're giving it a little bit of daylight and ensuring that they know we're taking this issue seriously. We care about this group of tenants and what their needs are. So if we can get an update, particularly around, are we in step with the FAA rules? And if we are, how we are clearly communicating that, and if not, rationale. How do we compare with Skagit and other regional airports in terms of our implementation? And are there any capital projects we should be giving some time and attention to, like a washdown station, things that have been asked for several years? And I need some help determining the feasibility of these type of projects. Are these have they not been done just because of money, or is it space, or is it not, they're not needed? A little bit more conversation would be useful for me.
We'll get that on the agenda.
Do you have a list of issues?
Mm-hmm.
Can you put that in an email form?
You can, yeah, I can put a list together and send it out to the
You've already got
commission.
it?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Correction noted. Anything?
Yes, I do. And actually, thank you to Commissioner Shepherd for jogging my memory. At the WPPA meeting, I found out that the Grays Harbor County, they take all their various schools tour their ports all the time, and I'd certainly like to put a program together at the Port of Bellingham here that includes all of our schools in Whatcom County, come through this port and understand that what the port does, what the port means to the county, and what the port means to the people in this county, and that the people in this county actually own the Port of Bellingham, not the city of Bellingham. So I would ask my fellow commissioners to help give direction to our staff that we try and come up with a plan that brings our youngsters in this county through these buildings in our port to understand what we actually do and what it's all about. So the next time that maybe if I run for office, people won't be asking me why they should worry about the Port of Bellingham. It's the city of Bellingham that owns it. I was pretty well shocked through the campaign to hear that over and over and over again. So
Yep.
I would like to educate our young folks as to what we do here.
Yeah.
There's nothing I'd
excellent.
rather do than help your reelection campaign. Yeah, that seems like I should be
Well,
focused on that.
Then we got to work on a high school, people, right?
Well, yeah, I was just about to say, I believe every elementary school kid in the county comes through the Marine Life Center here, and that's probably a little young to be educating about the port. So maybe we shoot for the older middle school or the younger high school kids and figure out a program for them. There's the, is it the schooner that they go on, or the snowbird or snow goose? Snow Goose, yeah. So they all go on the Snow Goose. They go through the Marine Life Center, but that's like 5th, 6th grade. So I think you're right. Like maybe an 8th, 9th, 10th grade type program. Stick with them a little more.
Yeah, but maybe give the option to the school, so that the option's there for school for the younger grades, if they think they want to put something together with us too.
It's a great idea.
Just
We'll
a little more than what they are now.
We'll sit down with the school district and come up with something. Yeah.
And, maybe I'll call on the Whatcom Commercial Fishermen's Association and maybe try and put something together for these youngsters to view a few boats when they come in on their tour to understand what that industry does as well as the other industries down here.
Great.
So.
I want to thank Commissioner Briscoe for leading that effort and giving the tours himself.
Not a problem, but you're driving the bus. I get the microphone. I get the microphone.
Are you done?
I'm done. Thank you.
All right, the last thing, I've got one thing on my plate. I've actually got
Only
two. but
one?
The first one is, two things. The first one is, and I'm sorry Sunil isn't here. I've had the opportunity to go through our airport since our last port meeting 5 different times on 5 different flights. And that operation is so flawless. The experience from the passenger side is just amazing. And Sunil, I'm sorry you're not here to see this, but the job that he does at that airport is phenomenal. So I pass that on to you, and kudos. And the last thing I've got is I would love to see a debrief on the Copenhagen trip at some level, because you took that trip over there, and I'd want to see what impact that might have on your thinking about the waterfront and where we're going to go. So if we could just get that as an action item.
You got to work for your trip, huh?
Can you show us the pictures in public, or is this got to be an executive session?
No, I don't need it now. At some point, I just want to see.
And then the city staff's working on that right now, so we're putting together something that we can hopefully do sooner than later. And if we need to come to the commission meeting, happy to do that as well. So we're working on that as we speak. So
I'm optimistic that it had some.
Oh, it was yeah. There was a lot of great stuff we're bringing home.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, great.
So I have one more question for you, Ron. In the timing of this trip, do you think it was better that we waited as to doing it before we had things going over here?
I think there would have been value either way. So I mean, I think we didn't lose anything by not going previously. I think we could have gotten a lot that would have helped inform the sub-area plan amendment process. But we're still bringing home a lot of stuff that we can apply here, and I think it was actually probably more helpful to the city team as a whole. Doing it this way. So I think there was a lot of benefit to it this way.
All right, great, thanks.
Yep.
All right, with that being said, any other issues? Meeting adjourned.
Other issues, we could be here all night.